I am here with my friend Myrzir the Legend, and this is something I'm actually really happy to do. I think it's going to be really fun. Myrzir is a guy who has so much knowledge about the lore of Destiny, and he has a lot of insight into many things I never knew about until I met him. I remember I met him in my Discord server because he was out of nowhere spamming these insanely cool pictures and assets that he'd like ripped from D1. And I remember messaging him and being like, dude, where are you getting these? And then we ended up talking and then we hit it off. And next thing you know, I am like enlightened. But anyway, I am really happy that I can have him in a call and I can ask him some of the questions that I really want to ask and ask him some questions that I got from you guys. And with all that being said, I'm going to let him introduce himself.
It's a big introduction to follow. I'm not really too sure where to start.
What's your name?
My name is...
Oh, no, okay, I was just joking. I was just saying Myrzir. It was a joke, sorry.
I see.
Don't dox
I didn't know if you wanted the whole kit and caboodle.
I was just joking.
That's bad. I'm never saying that again. But yeah.
What would you class yourself as? Like, what do you do? Like in Destiny.
What do I do?
Like what?
Okay, in regards to Destiny, you should have started off with that. Outside of that, I would have said I'm a remix artist, if that holds any value. But no, in context of Destiny, I'd say I'm more of a, for lack of a better term, and to rip one from Destiny itself, a chronicler. I try to archive as much knowledge about both the lore and the history and development surrounding it as I can.
Yeah,
I truly, deeply care about the things that go into the world and the people that make them.
Yeah, and that's not just lore. Like, you do music, you do lore, you do art.
True. Although, I would say the story and history side of it is my more intense hobby.
That's
the music mixes the art and the, I guess, I'm not really too sure. But yeah, that's more of a side hobby.
And when did you start properly digging into the story? Like, going from just a casual kind of enjoyer, like a game enjoyer, to somebody who was kind of trying to find as much as they could and going beyond what most people would?
I think it probably started back in Taken King. So I got the game in, obviously, release 2014. But before then, I tested the beta and I did the alpha. I was lucky enough, and my friend gave me the code. But I fell in love with the world. And then when the Books of Sorrow dropped, I realized that this was not any standard game. This was something that really had history and meaning behind it. So,
I get you.
Rise of Iron, Dawning, and Age of Triumph come out. And I realize there's a backlog here that I had hardly touched, because for as much as I enjoyed the story in the world, I didn't really read the Grimoire.
Okay.
I took a glance at the website and realized there was a lot to catch up on. D2 rolls around, I don't have the money to buy it, so I just dig deeper and deeper into D1 lore. And I notice there's a lot of depth here that you don't really get in the game. And I fell in love with the writing, so I looked up around the time, who wrote this? Who penned these amazing stories? And then I go back and I realize, it seems like this is all done by a labor of love. So I read up on John Goff, I read up on Clay Carmouche, I read up on our Lord and Savior Seth Dickinson, and I realize, wow, these people have made a whole universe in their hands. And not to discredit Staten, Jason Jones, Chris Barrett, or others who created the world, but these few people that worked on the Grimoire really carried the torch. As we all know, when the story reboot happened, a lot of things got pushed to the side. And the only way they could tell the stories they wanted to tell was through text. And whether we like it or not, the delay that happened from 2013 to 2014 really gave them time to flesh out the things they really wanted to tell.
That makes sense.
Sorry if that was a long-winded answer.
No, dude, no, you're perfectly fine. So you start digging in the Taken King, and you don't have enough to get D2 when it comes around, so you stay kind of focusing on D1. At what point do you get D2?
I think it's a little bit after launch, just before Curse of Osiris.
Okay. And did you approach D2 with the same, I guess, like fervor that you did with D1? Or was there a different moment with D2 where you decided to go kind of digging into it?
I think I was ecstatic about the release of D2. Hence why at the time I saved every little penny I could from a summer job up until like allowance just to buy it. But
wow.
When it finally did roll around, I wasn't really too keen on the soft reboot they were trying to do. They were pushing a lot of, I don't know, it seemed very cleanly to me, but I knew at the core there was still a lot to dig my teeth into, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. So I'm gonna ask a bit of a bigger question, and from everything that you have seen, and it might be a bit of a tricky one, so don't worry if you can't give like a direct answer, but from everything that you've seen and you've found, what would you consider to be your biggest discovery or the biggest realization that you had about the world and the story? Either D1 or 2.
I think my biggest revelation came fairly recently. And it started, I want to say 2022, when I started going back into Bungie's older games. Digging into Marathon and then learning about pathways and then digging into pathways. And it should have hit me like a truck when I read the Grimoire Anthology. Hearing Seth Dickinson himself say that, I'm paraphrasing of course, but there's a through line through every single game. And then studying all the concepts and inspirations that go into each. It enlightens the story that each game tries to tell tenfold, knowing what came before.
Yeah, even from you telling me things and sending me things, I can definitely relate to that.
But I think the biggest revelation is the fact that, I know I've said this to you personally before, but learning that Jason Jones has been making the exact same game for over 30 years. Well, I should shorten it down to 20 due to 2013, but semantics.
Yeah. So, just to make sure I'm getting this right, you think the biggest revelation for you was realizing the consistent pattern of repeating concepts and themes that ran throughout a lot of Bungie's games, even before Destiny.
The interconnectedness of it all.
Yeah.
Fine, but yes, yeah.
Yeah, I know when you began sending me lore, mainly the ones that mimic the garden with the devouring the lawn with the translucent blue flame, and the just all of the the marathon lore that's very, very eerily similar to some of the D1 stuff, and then even unveiling later on. I remember being kind of blown away. And then more recently, the revelation that you had, or that you showed me with the nightmare stuff in Pathways, and how that is really like once you know and understand it, it's in your face how much of that is in Shadowkeep, with the nightmares and the emotions attached to it, and all of that. So yeah, I can 100% see why that would be your biggest, I guess, revelation or moment.
Everything really does start to click into place when you dig into the inspirations behind things. Not just what you've been told and what is presented in front of you. You have to look past it. You have to look deeper.
Yeah.
When I saw the parallels between the nightmares, I didn't stop at that. Why choose nightmares? Why choose these emotions? And then you realize, when it comes to the inspirations behind these things, the story is more of a retelling than it is something wholly original. Not to diminish the originality that is in Destiny, but to say that it's a little hard to put into words, but to understand, there are correlations and parallels everywhere. The number one thing that constantly drives me back is the recurring motif of, for lack of a better term, ancient humanity.
Yeah.
Knowing that things start from one place and become a mirror to us. Whether good or bad, it doesn't matter. It's a mirror nonetheless. And it's obvious when you look at the Yarrow, the Forerunner, and now what was the Veil. They all start out as the same. They're all us. It's just the actions they choose and the differentiations between them becomes clear.
Mm-hmm.
One is about benevolence, one is about hubris, and the other is about a force of change, for lack of a, again, better term.
And when you say the term the Veil, you're talking about the original name for the pyramids, right?
Correct. The race tied behind them.
What I am actually going to do, just to tie in with that, is somebody on my channel, his name is David, he asks, what was the idea of the pyramids and the fifth race? It seems like they were planned to be in the original game, judging by trailers where the Dreadnought was in the game already and we had concept of the fifth race and the pyramids. Were they planned, or do you believe Bungie planned a darkness race back then as a part of some endgame in vanilla or some DLC?
Going off of everything I know and everything that we've seen from the previous games, and them all retelling the same story, I do think at some point they were supposed to show up. I don't know if it's inherently supposed to be just for D1, or if it's just for D2, but they were planned nonetheless.
And another question from Tailgate is, was the original name of the pyramid race the Veil?
Everything points to yes. All the signs say yes.
Even some things I've heard from Archival, he is also pretty convinced that that was the case. Yeah. And I guess carrying on with that, on that topic, you talked about how there is a pattern of repeating stories from these games interconnected throughout Destiny as well. And another pattern, unfortunately, that also exists would be the retcons that have happened in both D1 and D2. And I kind of want to start with something in D1, and I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on Rasputin's story? So the way it was supposed to be in the Staten Cut, the way that they then later changed it so that they got rid of the, Charlemagne and the other mines so that they were just sub-mines. What's your opinion on, I guess, this character's very weird evolution from the old D1 to what we have now?
Starting all the way back, it's supposed to be a continuation of the sword story started in Marathon. Marathon, of course, had Durandal, a sword held by, for the love of Christ, I'm forgetting the name. But Cortana is held by Ulgar the Dane, representative Master Chief, and then we were supposed to be the unnamed knight tasked with reclaiming or finding Joyeuse, the sword of Charlemagne. And Joyeuse, everything leads me to believe that that was the exo-puppet of the Warmind, Charlemagne. And the AI sort of, I wouldn't say companion, but acquaintance, ties back to both Cortana and Durandal. Heavily with Durandal being this rampant AI full of ego and self-importance. And it holds over because of the Grimoire cards we see directly calling back and referencing those lines said by Durandal all the way back in Infinity and Marathon 2. But when that changed in the Staten Cut to be Rasputin himself instead of Joyeuse, they change because of the development. It's not so much the story that has to change. They want to keep the same idea. So there is still this exo named Rasputin instead of Joyeuse, because of a change of location from Mars to Earth. And then when they realize they can't do multiple mines, they can only focus on one, they find it better to consolidate and focus on just the one. And it might be some internal struggle because they like the idea of having these multiple names so they can reference ideas and inspirations while still keeping focus on the main singular one. So from them having multiple minds to just the one to going back to sub-minds tells me that they still care about the original idea enough to go back to it and use pieces of it. But it's more of a consequence of development than it is intention.
And what about in D2? I think it was with the Warmind comic is when they did it, when they retconned there being multiple minds and there only being Rasputin with the subminds. What were your thoughts on that?
I didn't have too big of an issue with it because, again, it seemed like a consolidation or
consolidation.
Yeah, consolidation. Sorry, I mispronounced. It just felt like they were focusing on one rather than the others.
Yeah.
I didn't think that they were completely ignoring the others, but it felt a little odd to not bring them up anymore. Maybe they were saving them and didn't know how to use them, but they were still keeping them around.
Right. They kind of brought it up with Season of the Seraph, if I remember correctly, giving the names to the mines in the different bunkers we went into. I can't remember, the one had a very odd name. Yeah, that's it. But if I'm hearing this correctly, are you implying that in the Staten cut it wasn't actually Rasputin but Charlemagne as the main mind?
Not the main mind, but the only remaining one.
Right, okay. Yeah. So effectively that was the Rasputin character, if that makes sense. As like the last war mind left.
In the sense that we know it, yes.
So,
in terms of character, we would have interacted more with Joyeuse, the Exo, not so much the overarching core mind.
And I'm kind of just running with this now, but you believe that the Grimoire card where Rasputin talks about how it faced the darkness during the collapse, you believe that that was potentially near the Mars cradle where the gate to the garden was. Do you think there's a chance that that card was originally written to be about Charlemagne and then they just kind of lumped it in with Rasputin? Because Charlemagne was the mind of Mars, so that would have made more sense for it to be Charlemagne that met whatever it was than Rasputin.
Thing to take away from that is, or take away from the card, is from a red space before victory. Victory meaning the defeat of the Gardener. Victory of the Winnower over the Gardener. And red space, a space of red. The only place that we know that is majority red, or I guess rust colored, would be Mars. And the gate of the garden is on Mars. So everything's tying back to Mars. And the only mind that we know of had to have been Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
That's really interesting. That's actually really interesting. So, it's interesting. You also mentioned the Gardener and the Winnower, and I know I'm opening up a can of worms, but do you believe that the Gardener and Winnower are real? Or, what would your definition be of these characters?
Real in the sense that they are literal beings has always been up in the air. There is evidence for and against. But the concepts, they permeate. There's no way to nullify them at all. They are ever present. They always make themselves known. And the biggest tieback is, of course, with the fight in the garden. And the references back to the marathon terminals, specifically talking about them. We know this idea sticks around because it has so much levity to it. So much heft, so much weight. It holds importance. They can't just throw this away. So, for them to be literal beings would make sense in terms of myth, where there actually are gods. But in the sense of destiny, it's harder to quantify because it's not as hard sci-fi as both Marathon and Halo. but there are aspects of fantasy that can bring light to it, because as we all know, Destiny started out as a fantasy game. So who's to say that these beings weren't literal then?
True. Yeah, I would agree with that. For sure. Especially with the Chris Barrett art of what I'm assuming is the Winnower. Remember, I saw somebody, or maybe it was you or somebody else, who said that it was probably for when they were designing Destiny to be a fantasy game. But even still, I would argue that a lot of the concepts would have transferred over. So that's actually, that's a really good point that you make. I think that the way that I kind of see it is that whether they exist as literal entities that like you can touch and that walk around, I think that's kind of up in the air. I see them though as foreign bodies, and what I mean by that is that if we're taking unveiling literally, these beings are not from from Destiny's universe as they created it, and so in a way they are foreign to that universe, and so I think that might be why it's more of a manifestation that occurs, at least with the Gardener. I don't know with the Winnower at all. The closest thing at all to a manifestation of darkness that we've seen would be Marcena. Apart from that, you're looking at the need to possess something, like possess a body, like with the Unborn Ogre case. You also then have the more recent stuff with, say, the Veil, but now I'm kind of rambling. But I definitely agree with you that the concepts 100% permeate, and I don't even understand the Marathon lore as well as you do, but when you send me things, not only are the themes extremely similar, but then especially the language used about the flowers, the flame. And that's why you sent me that mixed and matched bit of lore for my video, and it almost seamlessly just melds together. So yeah, I would say that I am definitely with you on that one.
To say that they are purely conceptual is to kind of degrade the meaning and intent behind them. They show clear actions. They do things. To say that there is no consciousness behind it is to straight up lie to yourself.
They are characters.
Are they real? Yes. Are they physical? That's a different argument.
But they don't need to be physical to act and to cause change in the universe.
Correct.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And this kind of ties into, I guess, what we're talking about now, which is, what would your take be on unveiling? What would your interpretation be?
I believe the fact that it tells tales of things that really happened. These are events that happened. But the way they're told is a parable.
So, let me just make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So what you're saying is that it is a telling of accurate historical events, but it is told using a parable.
Correct.
So, as best as you can you explain how it is a parable and not just a retelling of events, if that makes sense? Like, how can you read the book and...
Terminology is the main thing.
Okay, can you give examples?
So when they refer to a Gardener and Winnower, it's supposed to be concepts that we can visualize. We can imagine an actual gardener, someone with a trowel in hand, carefully tending to flowers. But that isn't what they literally are.
I understand.
But
it's like a job title that we can just assign to them.
Yes.
Yes.
But there are things that still exist, and they use those terms. When they talk about a garden, they're talking about the Black Garden. When they talk about the Tree of Silver Wings and its stump, that is what we see, a physical stump. When they talk about a fight, the fight happened. But the things they go about saying the fight When they say soundless flash, blue flame, white flame, black flame, were those literal flames, or is that just something that we can associate with, something that we can understand? When the Winnower mentions a first knife, he's not talking about a literal knife he's holding in his hand. It's metaphor.
So I think the difficulty there is, and again, it's interesting because going back to Robert Brooks's quote, it kind of goes back to the Bible where you will have literal, like straight up events with metaphor mixed in, and it really is up to the individual interpretation to either just assign the one label to everything or to kind of pick and choose what they see as metaphor. So take me for example. I agree with you about the term Gardener and Winnower being a term it's easier for. It's a representation. It's a job title. You have these beings, they have their one purpose, and the term Gardener or Winnower is the easiest label to put onto them because it very easily summarizes everything they stand for and represent. The garden, however, I do believe that there was an actual garden, and I think the whole track record of the Tree of Silver Wings proves that. What's interesting, though, is in the lore when the Winnower talks about the first knife, I always just assumed that there was an actual knife. And so it gets to the point where you do your best to draw the line between literal and metaphor, but eventually it gets so difficult that not everyone can exactly draw the line in the same place. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
I think that's intentional on the writer's behalf, because you intertwine the metaphorical with the literal so much that it blurs the line, and you don't know whether or not to believe all of it is real or all of it is metaphor. And to try to find the distinction between which is and which isn't is the extremely hard part. So the discourse over this entire book is purposeful. It's meant to muddy the water, but also give us things that we can point at and say, this has clear evidence. We can point to this and say, yeah, this really happened, or this really does exist. While this, on the other hand, has basis, but isn't fully accepted.
So you believe that even when it was written back before Shadowkeep by Seth Dickinson, that it was his intention to cause that discourse and that muddying of the waters, as you put it?
Maybe not to the hostility and divide we see today, but purely to bring up questions. It's supposed to spark discussion, not divide.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would agree with that. And I also think it's fair to assume that he probably either figured or predicted that the answers would be trickled down by Bungie a lot differently than they have been. So that also has led to the type of divide and, as you put it, hostility that we see today.
I think a great example is the very first Darkness Grimoire card we got. Everything that it describes the darkness as, people see as completely separate things and can be applied to wholly separate things. But everything it says has aspects in one singular truth. So when it describes an invading armada, that can be applied to the Cabal, the Fallen, the Hive, and the Vex, and the Pyramids themselves. When it describes a post-singularity intelligence, that could be the Vex or the Witness. When it says a great storm of change, that could be any single one of them. But again, all of those have broader concepts in truth. Those all hold relevance, and they are, in fact, they do inherently describe the darkness, but it's supposed to raise questions. Are these all referring to different things? Are they referring to the exact same thing? Or are they all just aspects of one larger idea?
Yep. I think I know exactly what you mean. I think it's honestly, it really again comes down to personal interpretation, because it gets to the point where you're not just trying to figure out the correct interpretation of the text, but you're also trying to interpret correctly what the intent behind the writer is. So, for example, if you look at something like the 9 Grimoire, where it's a similar situation where you have the 9 are this, and the 9 are that, and the 9 are whatever, on the one hand, you can see it as one of them being true, or all of them having an aspect of truth. But at the end of the day, you're also then looking at the writer and thinking, do they even know, or are they just kind of winging it? And especially with the darkness, how Bungie came out and they said that they had no idea what the darkness is. For some people, that might lead them to look at the D1 Grimoire and write all of it off and say, well, Bungie clearly doesn't know what it is, so why should we believe it? So, and then even like what you said with Unveiling, it gets to the point where you also need to try and figure out what the intention was behind writing it.
Yeah. I think, and Chris Barrett even said this during the GDC talk, all the way back about building a Brave New World. He said, you want to give the players just enough to ask questions you never would. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but we need to be given just enough to ask questions. Because 9 times out of 10, the stuff that we would come up with, in their words, they say is better than anything they could have.
Interesting.
But mean that they don't know exactly what something is. Whether or not the players come up with ideas that are better than the developers, it's still up to them whether or not they decide that we're right.
Yeah.
They can take what we say and use it, or they can come up with something completely different. We're at their behest, not the other half. Or the other way around, sorry.
It is really... You see, I love how they are written to make you ask questions. The issue is when there's a disconnect between the written lore and the campaigns and the actual gameplay missions, because I feel like they're supposed to bounce off of each other. I feel that a lot of the lore will be consumed mainly by people who are into that, and you'll have a large chunk of the broader audience who will mainly just play the game and maybe even skip the cutscenes or whatever, but eventually those concepts will make it into the gameplay. But when there is a delay, that is when it really turns into guessing. And to go back to Unveiling, I think because there's been such a delay between that book and solid yes or no answers, it's caused those questions, it's caused those people to try and answer those questions themselves, because they're either done waiting or they feel like they never will get answers. And then I think that also leads towards the hostility. But yeah, that's just what I think about that. I kind of want to ask a follow-up question to what David had asked. And I want to combine that question with another question, which is, so from everything that you've seen and everything that you've discovered and that you've learned, it's kind of a two-part question. The first question is, what do you believe that the original story of the pyramids was or is? And, you know, that can be bringing up your theory about the Black Garden and Eden. It can be the link with ancient humanity. And at the same time, for the part 2, do you believe that the Witness as a character was always planned? And if not, or so, like, when do you think the Witness, as we have them now, was designed?
To state what I think the darkness was, is to tie back to ancient humanity. Yes, they are a dark parallel of the Yarrow and the Forerunner. They are us, but they're darker half. Obviously, that's probably no longer the case, but the architecture kind of points to that still being the case. But I do believe the main story for the original Darkness is a retelling of Adam and Eve and the fall from grace, where they were brought into the garden. They were brought into paradise, and they flourished. But they took forbidden knowledge and were kicked out. And the forbidden knowledge they seeked was to become unlike to the gods themselves. Or like unto the gods, sorry. And so when they make their way back to Eden, which is their long chase, they can enact that will.
Eden being inside of the Traveler at this time.
Yes, yeah. And the second half... Sorry, you're going to have to refresh me. Was the second question?
The second question was just, do you believe the Witness was always planned as like the character we have now? And like, when do you think they were designed?
I see. I do believe there was always a head figure for the pyramids. Either be it a leader or, as we have it now, a combined race. But the Witness as it exists right now, the earliest known documentation we have for the basis of it goes back to around the time of Forsaken. Maybe a little bit before, a little bit after. It's unclear, but it's around that time. I'd say 2018 to 2019 is when the Witness as we know it today began to take shape.
That's interesting because I remember we talked in the past and you had speculated that it could have been as late as Witch Queen itself.
Late as Witch Queen, but early as Forsaken.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's kind of just like a range where it could have happened.
Because there are clear inspirations in the design of the Witness from concept art that we know was made around Forsaken's time. Not for Forsaken, but around Forsaken's launch.
Which concept art?
And then the woman with the many heads and those fallen-looking creatures.
Right. You think those were ultimately used as inspiration?
Yes, I do. Whether if it was always the case that was supposed to be that, who could say? But it definitely holds credence.
I'm going to... Actually, we did kind of talk about this. Well, I brought it up and then we were talking about this before we began recording. Kind of through D1 and D2, what are your thoughts on the story?
I think it's hard to quantify because we never really had anything so substantial about them. Only bits and pieces here and there. I don't think my knowledge on the 9 is too extensive. It's very surface level. But from what I do know, the name goes back to myth. It is the exact same, the 9. It's about a group of 9 individuals or 9 beings. But the funny thing is that the 9 in myth are 9 developers from Bungie. And I guess they take that concept and apply them to the 9 as they are now in Destiny. When you look at how they're treated, especially in Dares of Eternity, which, as some know, was planned for Taken King all the way back in 2014, 2015. So a game show based around the history of Bungie and its games, and tying the 9 again back to Bungie themselves. I believe the 9 are Bungie, and that should be a little self-evident. But who they are in the context of Destiny's universe is more ambiguous. I think it holds credence to maybe the first or second line of the Grimoire card we had in D1, where they're sentient dark matter in the core of Soul's celestial bodies. Where they're trying to exist, but dark matter, when it comes in contact with matter, tries to cease to exist. Does that sufficiently answer?
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And do you think that... What do you think of how their story has been handled, let's say recently, where there was seemingly a build-up after Forsaken, and now they've been relegated to the game show?
I wouldn't even say the build-up is after Forsaken. I think the build-up was with D2 itself. D2 pushes them to the forefront, and is obviously having them take, maybe not center stage, but sharing the stage alongside the story that's being told with Red War, Curse of Osiris, Warmind, etc. But I'm not too sure if their plans fell through or if they weren't fully planned out. Because we have hints of them possibly taking a larger hold within Destiny's future story, I think it's the fault of development again that they keep being pushed to the side. Maybe not forgotten, just almost indefinitely postponed. And they bring them up when they can. So it starts with them sending Xur. And then we get the trials of the Nine. And then now we get dares. But it's, I mean, we had Prophecy too, but
Yeah, and Reckoning.
they never really have major importance. They can only fit them in when there's nothing else to be told about the story in that time. And then I really do believe that Prophecy was probably their send-off for now. It wasn't them completely writing them out of the story completely, because they still have a major presence. They tell us exactly what the light and darkness is. They say there is no difference. They are almost one and the same. And then the Veil Containment confirms that. But the Nine themselves, just telling us an answer and then never interacting with us again, that doesn't really feel right. Their story isn't done. They have to bring them back up eventually. There is plans there, I do believe that, but whether or not they have the ability to tell that story is something completely different.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I definitely think that they will touch on it after the final shape. My opinion, and I think I said this in my 9 video, I really do think that they were going to really push the 9 to the forefront even further in Destiny 3. And I think a lot of the build-up that we saw in Destiny 2 was for that. And I think when D3 got cancelled, they kind of got just left like, oh, well, where do we put them now? And so it's just been, yeah. But I do think after the final shape, there's going to be a lot of room to develop things that have been pushed to the side, like the 9, and I think that probably will happen.
I think every major Destiny release, be it expansions, DLCs, or games in general, they're always... They're stories with two sides. You have the major story, the one that the campaign tells you, and then you have the endgame story, the one that's on the back burner. For Destiny 1, the main story was the Vex, the Traveler, and the Blackheart. But the story in the background is of the Vault of Glass. And then with the subsequent DLC, Taken King, the main story is about, obviously, Oryx and the Taken. And then the aftermath of that is, obviously, everyone else trying to deal with how we ended up in this situation. How do we deal with the aftermath of what has happened? And then D2, the main story is the Cabal and the loss of our light. But in the background, we have the 9. And then throughout all of Destiny 2, the main story is us building up the light, expanding on our light, and teasing at the darkness. And I think D3, the main story would have been about the darkness facing the light, coming back and being in the forefront, while the background story, the side story, the end game would have been the 9.
Yeah.
And since D3 fell through, so did the 9.
Yep, I agree with all of that. That's kind of the way that I had been seeing it as well. And yeah, I just feel bad because I know that I have friends who are really, really invested in the 9 and love the characters, well, like the entity or whatever you would want to call them. And they always get really excited when there's anything to do with the 9 that's introduced, and so I kind of do feel bad when they're treated. I remember you said something that I thought was really interesting. You said that they will, I'm paraphrasing here, but they'll kind of touch on them when there's like nothing else like majorly going on. And it's kind of sad that you have a faction that's as important as this, and that's the box that they're put in, where it's like, we'll use you.
That's the most they can do with them.
Yeah, I do think that is sad. I want to touch on a fun question, and then I want to go back to some questions from the boys. So, if we got a red subclass, either in the final shape or afterwards, what do you think it would be?
If it's still darkness, which of course it has to be because of the 2R, and patterns say that of course it's going to be darkness, it has to be either Resonance or the Nightmare energy that's teased all throughout the remnants of D3 with Shadowkeep, Arrivals, and Beyond Light.
Yep. I sent you a picture from the Season of... Or actually, it was from the Forsaken Vidoc, and it was the teaser image for Season of Opulence. And the art had a very similar looking energy, like in the fire. I don't know if you remember the one I'm on about.
I do. I see it.
But, yeah, no, I personally would like that Nightmare energy. But it depends on the context and how they fit it into the story.
There have been rumors and names floating around like Strife, and if they do that, that is very funny that the past 3 subclasses have all been named starting with S.
True.
Stasis, Strand, Strife.
Yeah, true. True, for sure, dude. Yeah.
And another thing, they all start with ST, if Strife is have credence.
Yep. That'd be great.
I wonder if that's intentional. That'd be hilarious if it were.
Resonance, I used to really want, but because it's a bit more on the tech side, I don't. And then also the fact that there's like blue resonance, it doesn't seem to be like...
I would like to addendum that by saying resonance isn't technology. Resonance is like the combination of light and dark because it's used by both sides. But the only way it is used is through technology.
Yeah.
Technology in and of itself. Obviously.
No, that's what I mean. But it's yeah. Okay. I'm going to go through some more questions from the people. There was a question actually that is a little bit more relevant to stuff that's happening today. And it is about Lysander. And, you know, it's funny because I was reading this lore today. And it's the lore where the speaker is talking about Osiris. And he says that the Concordat claims that they have documentation that proves that Osiris was a golden age experiment or whatever. And this question is from Jay, or that is not Jay, and he asks if Lysander, the Concordat, had possibly confused Osiris for Felwinter, because Felwinter was obviously an experiment and a special type of exo. Do you think when the Concordat were saying that Osiris was like a golden age experiment, do you think that they were getting him mixed up for Felwinter?
I'm not too sure, because the only time that Osiris and Felwinter are brought up is, I want to say, the latest would have to be Seraph, when he mentions that he worked alongside Felwinter as Felwinter was Osiris's tutor, so they have a connection there. Whether that was always the case, and that Osiris was among, not a Iron Lord himself, but was with the Iron Lords, for that association to have been made, I feel like that does have, I guess, some credence, but I can't really say too much about that. I really don't think I know.
Yeah. No, me neither. You're gonna love this question, I think, because it's about Toland. And this is from Lord Grishnak. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Can we talk a little bit about Toland and about how many of the, at the time, seemingly very cryptic things he said years ago seem to have given preemptive confirmation about many of the most important fundamental and endgame concepts to Destiny, such as the actual nature of the darkness and even the final shape, which he called the last true shape and whatnot. Again, amazingly even before Beyond Light, as well as even some of mine own meaningful theories like about the darkness, the winnower, the sword logic, etc. I think there are important things that have been hiding in plain sight for years there with Toland and his dialogue and lore that relate to and even help confirm a lot of what I've been talking about lately, much more than I've seen anyone really notice or explore nearly enough as of yet.
Some context needs to be given. Toland, as far as I'm aware, is very, very close to being Seth Dickinson's insert character. Seth Dickinson, as people should know, I would say as we all know, but that's sadly not the case, wrote over half of the Grimoire, not just in base game D1, but throughout its history when we had Grimoire. And everything surrounding Toland was penned by Seth. And Seth came up with the idea of the final shape as we know it. Maybe not today, but up until the point of probably beyond. And to have Toland be his surrogate puppet to speak these truths to us is almost direct words from Seth, trying to explain that, yes, this is what the darkness is. This is what it's trying to do. This is what it's trying to say.
And this includes Toland in Forsaken and Shadowkeep as well. The remnants that like you interact with, and then you get the dialogue. He wrote those as well.
Which is funny because a lot of his dialogue in Forsaken and some remnants in Shadowkeep are direct recordings of things he said in the grimoire.
Right.
So it's just a verbal confirmation. So now it's not just in text, it's in speech. We can hear it. We can hear him say it. Of course, we have to go out of our way to actually listen to him and not just start up a patrol and get some XP, but to actually take what he says into account. Seth has hinted at the true nature of the darkness and how things are going to play out ever since D1. And it's been breadcrumbs. And only now are we getting confirmation. Straight up confirmation. Not just, oh, here's what it could be, here's what we think it is, and it's being coy. But it is now straight up, yes, this is what this is.
But now he's no longer at the helm, so it's kind of hard to say how it's going to play out.
Was that it?
Oh, no, sorry. Can you say that again?
I said, was that it?
Yeah, that was the question. Yeah, that actually is really sad. That's depressing, dude.
I had to take a moment to let it all sink in.
Second last question that I see here anyway is, what was the thought behind Void, Arc, and Solar to begin with? And why those elements? And was there a point to them specifically, or was it as simple as they just wanted cool powers?
Occam's Razor says that they just wanted cool powers. And then, subsequently, I think they tried to justify those powers. Maybe not so late in development, but obviously, we want abilities. We want cool abilities. And the coolest ones that we can find are things that are all over popular media. So, lightning, fire, and mystical energy, right?
Right.
So,
right.
of course, we have Arc, Solar, and Void. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, even back in D1, they're described as fundamental forces. Gravity, weak force, and strong force. I forget which is which for Solar and Arc, but Void is gravity itself, obviously, we know that. And then they were always going to expand upon these powers, whether if it's just these three or if they're going to add more, which we came to learn later on with D2 and obviously Beyond Light and subsequent powers. But they're tied to hard sci-fi, fundamental concepts that we can look to in reality and say, okay, so this is how we're harnessing them. It's not just magic. Obviously, the way we go about it is magic, but they in and of themselves are representations of actual things.
And I remember...
But
No, that makes complete sense. And to expand on that, I remember you talking about stasis specifically and how that is a concept that's existed for a while.
Yeah, stasis has its roots all the way back in Minotaur, and then was expanded upon a little bit in Pathways, where there's a crystal in Minotaur that freezes things, and it is called a stasis crystal. And then later in Pathways, the character, Major or Sergeant Eddings, John Eddings, I forget his name, but the player character in Pathways has crystals that do the exact same thing, except this time they're blue. So, blue stasis crystal, a power which the player wields.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to see why they would have brought that back.
Yep. That's really cool though, how it's not just random, oh, we just want to give them powers and we'll just go whatever. I like how they put the sci-fi element into it. I do wish, the one thing I will say, and by the way, that was from Awesome Sonic, I forgot to say his name. One thing I will say is that Void has always been a little bit weird, because it is gravity, but it's always a little bit darker than Arc and Solar. And I always wish they kind of expanded on that element, but yeah, no. I think Void...
I would say it's a little misleading to label it as dark when everything says this is a light subclass. We fear what we do not understand, and Void was always the one that was always the most mysterious and enigmatic. So when we don't understand something, we fear it. we fear things that are bad, that are dark, that are evil. So we sort of conflate the idea of darkness with void, even though that's not necessarily the case. It's just, it's unknown, it's enigmatic.
Yeah, that's
It's
fair.
not something to be feared. It is, and always will continue to be, just gravity and light.
Which is also funny because gravity is also, well, it used to be anyway, linked to the darkness. So it's also kind
And
of
again, as we learned, the darkness did harness both powers of light and dark to use for their benefit, so.
Yep. And I think this is the final question. I'm going to do a final refresh of this page. The final question is from Elden Tales. While the supposed winnower says that there is no end to samsara, this is from the Shadowkeep Collector's Edition lore, the witness keeps saying no more life, no more death. Why is it that the witness gave the artifact to us in Shadowkeep, even though we ended up hearing the winnower instead through unveiling? The witness and the winnower are not in agreement, so that is confusing. That's the question.
Sorry, I was muted. But
You're good.
I think it comes back to what you said before, where it's conflict within the writers, where they're not too sure what they want to do. And I think it's internal conflict even more so because some writers might not even be aware that they're conflating both the ideas of the witness and the winnower together, even though there's contradiction there.
Right.
So, for one to say there is an end, and for one to say that there isn't, and they go about it in two separate ways, speaks to more of the fact that it's not completely understood what they want, even though they're stating as this is what we do want.
So it's just development. It's issues with the communication and issues on deciding a unanimous, agreed upon direction and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Especially with Seth not being on the narrative team and just being a contractor, so that kind of causes a bit of distance between him and the other writers. More likely than not, I'm assuming. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting that. My final question is, what are your predictions for the final shape?
It's always hard to make predictions because no one can ever really know what's actually going to happen. Everything is constantly in flux and could change at any moment. But there are a lot of things that have to be set in stone. And for however unlikely it is, or likely it is, to ignore stuff that has been laid as groundwork would be very disappointing. So a part of me
Can you give examples?
really wishes that we get to see a reveal and confirmation whether or not the Gardener and Winnower actually exist. This is the major thing that needs to be revealed. Second, predictions. I think it's going to be like every other DLC we've had. Bungie has a track record of when things go very horribly wrong and then sentiment and morale is at an all-time low, they can pull things back from the ashes. They've done it with Taken King, they've done it with Forsaken, and it's like clockwork.
Yeah.
So this is probably the lowest the Destiny community's ever been. So for them to try to pull off a miracle, they're going to have to. There's no way around it. And I think they've been holding their cards very, very close to their chest. I think there is some amazing stuff that we will see. And that's not just because copium or hopium.
Yeah.
I really do think that it's the case.
So you do want to see confirmation of some kind about the Gardener and Winnower, whether or not they exist. Do you have any hopes for the pyramid stuff?
In terms of a race?
Well, either there being a playable enemy race, or there being, say, confirmation about more in-depth information about their origins and their story.
I think there will be, but I don't know if that'll take center stage. I think it'll be mainly about what the marketing is telling us. Stop the witness, have a reveal of some major kind, and then the aftermath before the first episode, but after the campaign is finished, will be about dealing and learning more about who they are and what they wanted. And I say wanted because obviously
Yeah.
This game's go. We're gonna win.
And do you think there's a chance of there being an enemy race introduced?
I mean, we have a pattern already forming with the reveal of tormentors and then subsequently subjugators. So I think if it's not for Final Shape, it'll probably be for Echoes, where they're going to trickle in more enemy units, whether it'll be a race, a full race, or if it's just for individual stuff for other races, remains to be seen. But
Yeah.
we'll definitely have something.
Yeah, I can understand. Kind of like with the... I'm blanking on their names in Beyond Light for the Vex.
The Wyverns?
Exactly. Yeah. And do you think that with the delay, there's a chance that we get the new subclass?
I do think it's more likely. I mean, with the delay, it's all about balance. I don't think it's so much about like whether or not it's ready, because I think it's probably ready, but balance is the only thing they have to worry about. It'll be like Strand and Stasis, where it'll be highly overtuned or slightly undertuned.
Yeah, for sure. I think I could see them doing it for the marketing alone. They come out in April or whenever the new showcase is going to be, and they update the Final Shapes poster with a new subclass on it. I think just for the numbers of pre-orders and sales, I could see them doing it for that.
A big part of me strongly believes that they're holding a lot of cards close to the chest, and with the delay, having a subclass with the DLC is way more likely.
Yeah, I agree for sure. I don't know what my predictions are yet. I don't want to say anything just yet because I'm still trying to figure out what I think is valid and not valid. But yeah, no, I think that everything that you said, I think it's not even that you had predictions, but the things that you want to see and everything that you want to see, I want to see as well. And I'd be very happy if I did see them. And for some things, I think mainly the Gardener and Winnower, I think I would be disappointed if there wasn't. Not just because like, oh no, my theories, whatever, but it's always sad when you see a build-up of lore kind of just not get a payoff.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me is confirmation, either directly or indirectly. If they don't appear, I'll be satisfied with what we have, and at least I'll know that this is a conclusion. It is done.
Yeah.
But if it is revealed, that's just the icing on the cake.
Yeah, yep, I agree. For sure. I think that at this point, them revealing those characters is actually extending the story instead of ending it, because it feels very weird that this is like a solid conclusion, but then you're just introducing these characters. So
I could see them revealing the character and tying them up with a bow, and then focusing on something completely different. I could see that as a possibility. Will it be a good possibility? That's up for everyone else to decide. We can't really claim that. But to introduce something that has been built up the entire time and then continue it when you say this is a sort of conclusion feels a little misleading and a little harmful. Maybe that's not the right term to use, but it seems
no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're just gonna have to wait and see. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
For better or worse, we will find out. But yeah, no, those are all the questions that I had, and those are all the questions that I've seen from people. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that. Was there anything that you wanted to end with? Was there anything that you wanted to say?
Nothing particular that comes to mind.
Okay.
I think all the points we've gone over, things that I really wanted to get out, so yeah.
I think what I will say is that I cannot stress enough that your contribution to the community, however much, to the lore community, however much unseen, I think it is absolutely priceless. And I know that usually it's the people with like the big channels that get the recognition, but the things that I have learned from you and that I have seen that you discover, and the things we've discovered together, I truly think that you have to be one of the most valuable members of the community. I would say, like, in a lot of ways, you provide more value than even I do. It's just that I make videos and you DM the info to friends. But yeah, I really think that you deserve more recognition, and I really would love it if, as time goes on, more and more people come to appreciate you, because you do have your own channel, and you mainly post your remixes there, and you also have like lore things. Like, you have your one video of, it's like a collection of the Toland dialogue, and the one guy even mentioned Toland with the true shape, the true, the one true shape or whatever, the true final shape. How did he put it? The last true shape, exactly. And you have a video where he talks about that, and you have a video that is like a collection of things from the state and cut and whatever. And there are things that you've shown me and talked to me about that we haven't even gone over in this discussion that are just like insane. So I would say to anybody who is watching this, if you're watching my channel and you like my channel, you're somebody who cares a lot about the lore, but especially like the really nitty-gritty deep things. If you like my channel, there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be following Myrzir as well, because you probably will love his music, and at the same time, whenever he does drop information, it's usually like an absolute bombshell, or it's like really, really solid. So definitely check him out. And yeah, also, it'd be really great. We've talked about it, I think. If you, me, and Archival or somebody else were to like have a podcast or something, like do like kind of a group call. I think, was it one time we were having a group call and one of us was like, we brought up the idea? I can't remember.
Yes, yeah. It may have been me. It may have been Promethean. But I think we're on the same page that just discussing various topics about the lore would be fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm not too sure if we've had, or the community as a whole has had something like that, where various different minds discuss the lore in broadly different viewpoints.
Yeah.
We've had people talk together about lore, obviously, because you've had, what comes to mind, obviously the DCP, Destiny Community Podcast, and then Unknown Player with
and
Bife.
Bife. Yeah.
But other than that, no one's really
No.
heavily disagreed or had different opinions on the lore and chatted about them that way.
I think we should do it. Obviously,
Like,
it comes down to times and what people want. I don't know if Promethean or Archival, if he'd be down for that, but I think it'd be great.
One last thing I want to add,
Yeah, go for it.
and this is just to anyone who's watching or listening. I think the inspirations for the game serve more for it than the smallest details. Because if you look at the inspirations, you'll have greater knowledge and greater respect for what the writers put in front of you. And I believe looking at what inspires other people will inspire you.
Yeah, I agree with you. It'll not only make you enjoy the information or the content more, but especially if you're a creative type, it can 100% inspire you in whatever your own, whether it be art, music, or writing. 100%. Yeah. It's all about the passion at the end of the day. I know it sounds like really cheesy, but
I mean, cheesy things are cheesy for a reason, because they hold truth.
But yeah, no, with all that being said, I think we've covered everything. I don't have anything else that I want to say, and I think I'm good. What about you?
All set here.
Okay. Well, yeah, with that being said, I'm going to end it here. I hope everybody who watched this, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, leave comments. This is the first time I've done like a one-on-one interview style thing before. If you like the idea of us doing a podcast or some kind of thing in the future, let me know. And yeah, no, with all that being said, I'll talk to you guys real soon. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.